HOA Karen's son. Thought I'd pay for his crash. What happened next left him shocked. I was standing on my porch when the sound hit like thunder, a car. Straight through my fence, wood snapping in pieces. And then I saw him, Karen's son, stepping out with a smirk. He didn't look guilty. He looked ready for war. And when he called the cops, pointing at me like I was the criminal, that's when I knew something dark was about to unfold. What happened after, no one in the neighborhood will ever forget. Welcome back to HOA Secrets Uncovered. I'm Daniel. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the grass is trimmed short, the fences stand tall, and the HOA thinks it owns everything. But today, you'll hear my story. The day Karen's son crashed into my fence, blamed me for it, and set off a chain of events that shook our entire street. I was still standing by the porch when the dust settled around my fence. The air was filled with the smell of burnt rubber and broken wood. My fence leaned sideways, crushed like paper under the weight of his shiny black car. And there he was, Karen's son, stepping out like nothing had happened. Not a sorry, not even a glance of guilt. He brushed off his shirt, checked his phone, and then looked straight at me, like he was the victim. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the anger inside me was already boiling, because this was not just any neighbor. This was Karen's son, the prince of our street, spoiled, untouchable, the boy who thought rules bent for him because his mother bent them first. I could see the reflection of the broken fence in his car window. The wooden planks lay across my grass like fallen soldiers. That fence wasn't just wood to me. I had built it with my own hands, nailed each post under the hot summer sun, painted it white so it stood proud in front of my little house. It was mine, my effort, my ride. And now it was nothing but wreckage under his tires. He finally spoke, his voice sharp, arrogant. "You'll pay for this," he said. Not joking, not mocking. He meant it. He pointed at the fence like it was my crime scene. I stepped forward, stunned by his words. "I'll pay?" I repeated. "You crashed into my fence. Look at it. Look at your car." But he only smirked. "That fence shouldn't be there. It's too close to the road. You broke HOA code. You're going to be responsible for this damage." I felt my fists clench, because I knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't just about the crash. This was about power. His mother's power. The HOA president who lived for control. And here was her son, using her name as a shield. Before I could argue more, he pulled out his phone, dialed 3 numbers, and calmly said, "Yeah, I'd like to report an accident at Oak Ridge Lane, house number 12. My neighbor's fault. Yes, my car is damaged." He looked right into my eyes as he said those words, like he was daring me to speak, like he already knew how the game was played. Because in our neighborhood, whenever Karen spoke, the HOA listened. Whenever Karen pointed, rules bent in her favor. But this time felt different, because there were pieces of my fence scattered on the road. And there was his car, nose buried in my lawn. And no matter how much he tried to twist it, reality was staring right at us. Still, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread. The cops were coming, and I knew, somehow, This was going to turn ugly. Minutes later, the wail of sirens broke the silence. Red and blue lights flashed across the houses. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains. Some stepped out onto porches, because in a quiet neighborhood like ours, drama spread faster than fire. Karen herself came running down the street, her hair tied back, her clipboard in her hand like always. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look worried. She looked ready, like she had been waiting for this moment. "Don't say a word," she hissed to her son as she reached him. Then she turned to me with that fake smile she wore at HOA meetings, the smile that never touched her eyes. "Well, well, looks like your fence has caused a real problem this time," she said softly, loud enough for the officers to hear. I wanted to explode, but I held my ground, because I knew if I raised my voice, if I showed anger, she would use it against me. She always did. The officers stepped closer, one of them scribbling on a pad. Karen waved her clipboard like it was law itself. "This fence," she announced, "was built too close to the road. It violates Section 4, Subpart 12, illegal structure. My son is the victim here." Victim. The word rang in my ears like an insult. Her son, the victim, standing there beside a car that was still steaming from the crash. I turned to the officers. "She's lying," I said. "This fence was approved. It's been here for years. It's on my property line. She knows that." Karen tilted her head, her eyes glinting with cold amusement. "Oh, really?" she said. "Then why don't they measure it? Why don't they check if you're telling the truth?" And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Karen didn't care if she was right or wrong. She only cared about winning. And if the cops sided with her, if they believed her lies, I would not only pay for the damage to my fence, I would pay for the damage to her son's car too. My stomach dropped. Because her son's car wasn't just scratched. The hood was caved in, the bumper destroyed, the wheel bent. It was thousands of dollars worth of repairs, money I didn't have. The officers exchanged looks. Then one of them bent down. He pulled out a small tape measure, stepped across the road, measured from the curb to my fence. The whole neighborhood went silent. Every second stretched like hours. Karen smiled, confident. Her son leaned against the car, smirking again. And me. I stood frozen, praying that my work, my fence, my effort was not about to bury me alive. The officer stood up, his face unreadable. He glanced at me, then at Karen. The air grew thick. Even the neighbors stopped whispering. And right there, I knew. Something was about to break. But what would it be? My fence? Or Karen's lies? I could feel my throat tighten as the officer rolled the tape measure back into his pocket. His face was blank, unreadable, like he had done this 1,000 times and never cared about the wreckage left behind. Karen leaned forward, that same smug smile stretching wider. Her son folded his arms across his chest, waiting for the verdict like it was already his victory. The whole neighborhood, silent, hanging on one word. The officer took a deep breath, and then he spoke. "This fence," he said slowly, "is within code." The air shifted, like the wind itself changed direction. Karen's smile froze, her eyes blinking fast. Her son straightened up, suddenly not so confident. And me. I felt my heart pound like a drum, like maybe justice had decided to visit my street for once. But Karen wasn't finished. She never was. She laughed, too loud, too sharp. "Oh, come on. You can't be serious," she said. "This fence has been a problem for years. I've filed complaints. I have the records." She waved her clipboard like it was the Bible, the sacred text of the HOA. The officer didn't flinch. He simply scribbled something down. But Karen wasn't speaking for him anymore. She was speaking for the audience, the neighbors peeking from their porches, the ones whispering about every move she made. She needed control, and she was losing it. Her son tried to jump in. "Look at my car," he said angrily. "Look what it did to my car. This guy should be paying me, not the other way around." I stared at him, stunned at the audacity, because there it was, the true Karen bloodline, never wrong, never guilty, always the victim. The officer turned to him slowly. "Sir, you were speeding down this road," he said. "There are skid marks on the pavement. Fresh ones. You lost control. Hit the fence. That's on you." Karen's son opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He closed it again, his face turning red. Karen stepped closer to the officer. Her voice lowered, syrupy sweet. "Listen, we can resolve this without all the paperwork. No need for reports. We're good neighbors here, aren't we?" The officer stepped back, his expression hardening. "No, ma'am. I'll need your insurance details. And your son's license." Her mask slipped then. The sweetness drained away, leaving only steel. She yanked the clipboard against her chest like a shield. "This is harassment," she snapped. "You don't understand how this neighborhood works." But the officer wasn't listening anymore. He was already writing the report, calling in the tow truck. And me, I just stood there, watching the queen of the HOA crumble on her own front line. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, its heavy chains rattling like judgment itself. The neighbors moved closer now, some pretending to take walks, others openly watching from the sidewalks. They were hungry for drama, and Karen had given them a feast. The truck hooked onto the car, metal against metal, the sound echoing through the cul-de-sac. Karen's son shouted, "You can't do this. That's my car." But the driver didn't care. He just did his job, pulling the shiny black car away from my broken fence, dragging it like a beast being led to slaughter. I swear, in that moment, I almost smiled, because for once, it wasn't me under fire. It wasn't me fighting fines or letters or threats. It was them. But even as I stood there, I felt the chill in the air. Because Karen wasn't done. She would never be done. As the tow truck disappeared down the street, Karen turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine, and I swear, I could feel the promise in her glare. This wasn't the end. This was just the start of another game. I walked back toward my porch, my fence still in pieces, the grass torn up by his tires, and behind me I heard her voice, sharp as a knife cutting through the night. "You'll regret this." The words hit harder than the crash itself, because in this neighborhood, when Karen said you'd regret something, it usually meant she had a plan. I sat on my porch, neighbors still staring, whispers circling like vultures. Some of them probably sided with her, afraid of crossing her power. Others, maybe secretly cheering that the queen had been humbled. But no one spoke out loud. No one ever did. That was the way of Oak Ridge Lane. Smiles in the daylight, knives in the dark, and me. I stared at the wreck of my fence, wondering how far she would go this time, Would it be another letter in my mailbox? Another violation notice from the HOA? Or something worse? Something I couldn't even imagine yet. The night grew heavier. The porch light flickered. And I sat there asking myself, did I win today? Or did I just light the fuse to something much bigger? The night after the crash, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me think of Karen's words. You'll regret this. They echoed in my head like a curse. I knew her too well. She never lost without revenge. And this was her biggest humiliation yet. By morning, the whispers had already started. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed down near my house, glancing at the broken fence, shaking their heads. Some gave me looks of pity. Others looked away, like being seen talking to me would put a target on their back. That was how Karen worked. Not with fists, not with weapons, but with fear, with isolation, with rules that bent like shadows depending on who you were. I drank my coffee, staring at the mailbox, because I knew, sooner or later, something was going to show up inside it. And I was right. By noon, a white envelope sat in the box, crisp and neat, with the HOA seal printed at the corner. My stomach twisted as I pulled it out, because I didn't even need to open it to know what it said. Violation notice. The paper inside was cold, official, and dripping with venom in every line. Your fence is declared unsafe and non-compliant. Immediate repair is required at homeowner's expense. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action under HOA Code 4.12. I wanted to laugh, because wasn't it her son who destroyed the fence? Wasn't it his car that tore it apart? And now, they were ordering me to fix it, at my cost. The irony burned hotter than the sun, but beneath that was fear, because I knew if I ignored it, the fines would pile up. And in this neighborhood, fines turned into court letters, and court letters turned into ruined lives. I crumpled the paper in my fist, but I didn't throw it away, because I would need proof. That evening, I saw Karen walking her dog past my house. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The slight tilt of her chin, the way she walked faster as she passed, it all screamed the same thing. She was in control again. And she wanted me to know it. Her son wasn't with her. Maybe hiding. Maybe too embarrassed to show his face until the tow truck took his car. But Karen didn't need him. She had the HOA, and she had the rules. I stood there, watching her, and something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her write the story this time. I wasn't going to be the villain in her twisted little play, so I made a choice. I grabbed my phone and started making calls. First, the city zoning office, then property records, then the county building inspector, because if Karen wanted to play with rules, I was going to drown her in them. But even as I made those calls, a part of me wondered, was I waking up a beast I couldn't control? Because people like Karen didn't lose quietly. They struck back harder, dirtier, and without limits. The next morning, I found something else in my yard. Not a letter this time. A note. Handwritten. Tucked under a rock near the broken fence. It said only 3 words. Scrawled in messy ink. Fix it now. No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew her handwriting. I had seen it on enough complaint slips. enough warnings shoved under neighbors' doors. I held the note, the paper shaking slightly in my hand. Because this wasn't official HOA language. This wasn't legal threats. This was personal. And that made it worse. Because when Karen got personal, things always spiraled out of control. That night, I couldn't sit still. Every time headlights passed my window, I thought it was her. Every rustle in the yard, I thought maybe she sent someone to damage more of my property. Paranoia crawled under my skin like ants. I walked out to the fence with a flashlight, staring at the wreckage again, and I asked myself, was this just about money? Or was this about power? Because the way she looked at me, the way she smiled when she thought she was winning, it felt like something deeper. Like she didn't just want me to pay. She wanted me to break. The next HOA meeting was coming up in 2 days, and I knew she would use that stage to humiliate me even more. Stand there in front of everyone, paint me as reckless, dangerous, the neighbor who couldn't follow the rules, and I couldn't let her, not again. So I started gathering everything. Photos of the crash, copies of the officer's report, measurements of the fence line. If she wanted a war, I was going to give her one. But late that night, as I set the papers on my table, I heard it again. A sound outside. Not a car this time. Not footsteps. A slow scrape. Wood against metal. Near the side of the house. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the flashlight, stepped out onto the porch. The yard was empty. Silent. But the fence, the broken part, looked different. Like someone had moved a piece, dragged it across the grass. I stood there, frozen. The beam of light shaking in my hand. Was it kids? A prank? Or something else? Something darker? Because one thing was certain. Karen's promise was real. She wanted me to regret standing up to her. And maybe this was just the beginning. The sound of wood scraping against metal haunted me long after that night. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe kids playing a prank. Maybe the wind. But deep down, I knew. It was her. Karen didn't need to knock on my door to send a message. She left her words in envelopes, in notes tucked under rocks, in whispers that traveled faster than sound through the neighborhood. And now, she had started leaving marks in my yard. By morning, I could feel the tension pressing against me like humidity before a storm. I didn't even want to check the mailbox, but of course I did. And there it was again. Another envelope with the HOA seal. My hands shook as I tore it open. This one wasn't about the fence. This one was about my lawn. Your yard has failed inspection. Grass height exit. Seeds community standards. Immediate compliance required or fines will be imposed. I almost laughed. My lawn. The same lawn I had cut 2 days ago. The same lawn that wasn't even an inch too high. Now suddenly it was a violation. I looked out across the street, and there she was. Karen, standing at her mailbox with her dog on a leash. Her eyes met mine. Cold. Steady. And then she smirked, like she could hear the paper crumpling in my fist from where she stood. I wanted to march across that street, shove the letter back into her hands, and tell her she could choke on her own rules. But I didn't. Because that's what she wanted. A scene. A fight. Something she could twist and tell the board later. So I stayed still, forcing myself to breathe. But my silence didn't stop her. Nothing ever did. By the afternoon, another neighbor dropped by, Mrs. Hayes, a sweet old woman who lived 2 doors down. She leaned close, whispered like the walls themselves had ears. "Karen's been telling people you're dangerous," she said. She said you threatened her son after the crash. Said you're unstable. I felt the blood drain from my face. Because it was starting. The whisper campaign. The one thing Karen did better than anyone else. She's trying to make you the villain, Mrs. Hayes warned softly. Be careful. She's setting you up. Her words stuck in my chest like thorns, because I could already see it. Karen didn't need to win with rules. She could win with rumors. Turn the whole street against me until no one believed a word I said. That night, I sat in the dark with only the hum of the fridge behind me, staring at the papers I had gathered, the photos, the police report, the measurements. I had proof, hard proof. But what good was proof when the jury was an HOA board that worshipped Karen like she was royalty? The day of the HOA meeting arrived like a hammer. I almost didn't go, but I forced myself to, because if I didn't show up, she would own the story completely. The clubhouse smelled like old carpet and cheap coffee. Chairs lined up in rows, neighbors filling them slowly. Some avoided my eyes. Others gave me quick nods, but none dared speak. And then she walked in, clipboard in hand, hair tied tight, the sound of her heels echoing against the tile like a countdown. She took her seat at the head of the table, the queen on her throne. The meeting started with small complaints, trash cans left out, holiday lights taken down too late. But I knew, everyone knew, what the main event would be. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice smooth and sharp at the same time. We have a serious violation to address, she said. House number 12, the damaged fence, the unsafe yard, the repeated refusals to comply with our community standards. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, heavy, accusing. Karen's son wasn't there. But she didn't need him. She had already built the stage. And now, it was my turn to play the villain in her script. I stood up slowly, my voice steady even though my hands trembled. The fence was destroyed by her son's car, I said. I have photos. I have the police report. The officers confirmed my fence was legal. It was never a violation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some neighbors glanced at each other, doubt flickering in their eyes. But Karen didn't blink. She smiled, like a cat waiting for the mouse to finish speaking. When I held up the police report, she cut me off. Objection, she said sharply. This report is irrelevant to HOA code. We are not bound by police investigations. We follow our rules. Her words sank like poison into the room, and I realized she wasn't just twisting the truth. She was bending reality itself. Because in her world, rules were not written. They were whatever she said they were. The board members nodded slowly, hesitant, but too afraid to challenge her, and I knew I was losing the room. So I made one last gamble. I turned to the neighbors, all of them, and I spoke louder. You all saw it, I said. You heard the crash that night. You saw the tow truck. You know it wasn't me who caused this. It was her son. The room went still. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, because they had seen, they had heard. But would they dare admit it? Would they risk Karen's wrath? Karen leaned back in her chair, her smile wider now. You see, she said softly, unstable, angry, always pointing fingers. This is exactly what I warned you all about. And in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't a fight over a fence anymore. This was a war for the neighborhood itself, and she was winning. The silence after Karen's words hung heavy. It felt like the entire room had already decided, and I was guilty before the vote even began. I could see it in their faces, the hesitation, the fear, the unwillingness to challenge her, because fighting Karen wasn't just disagreeing. It was social suicide in this neighborhood. She had too much power, too much influence. And for a moment, I thought about giving up. I thought about walking out of that room, letting her have her victory. But then, something inside me snapped. I slammed the report down on the table, the sound echoing through the hall like a gunshot. Everyone jumped, eyes darting back to me. And in that instant, I stopped caring what they thought of me. Because I had something Karen didn't expect. I had witnesses. I pulled out my phone, scrolled quickly, and held it up. It was a video, grainy, shaky, but clear enough. The night of the crash, captured by my doorbell camera. The sound of screeching tires filled the clubhouse speakers, the thud of metal hitting wood, and then her son's car, headlights glaring into the lens before the screen went black. Gasps filled the room, chairs scraped back, people whispering in disbelief. Karen's face froze, her smile finally cracking for the first time. "You see this?" I said, my voice sharp. "This isn't my opinion. This isn't a rumor. This is the truth. Her son destroyed my fence, and she's been trying to bury it ever since." For a moment, I thought I had won. For a moment, I thought the tide had finally turned. But Karen, she didn't break. She didn't apologize. She didn't falter. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes burning into me, and she said something that chilled me more than any threat ever could. "That video," she hissed, "violates community privacy policy, and by showing it here, you've just committed a serious offense." The room fell silent again. Her words were venom, twisting everything backwards, and before I could even respond, one of the board members nodded nervously, agreeing with her, just like that. My proof became a weapon against me. My evidence turned into another violation. And the crowd, the neighbors who gasped only seconds ago, now stared at me with suspicion again. I felt the ground slipping beneath me, like I was standing on sand instead of solid earth. Because in Karen's world, the truth wasn't enough. The rules weren't written down. They were whatever she wanted them to be. The meeting adjourned in chaos, whispers following me out the door. I could feel their eyes stabbing into my back. Some pitied me. Others feared me. But none stood beside me. By the time I got home, I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted. The fight had drained something out of me, something I wasn't sure I'd get back. I sat in the dark living room, phone buzzing with messages I didn't want to read. And then, there was a knock at the door. For a second, I thought it was Care, come to finish the job herself. But when I opened it, it wasn't her. It was a man, tall, gray hair at his temples, dressed in a faded polo shirt. He looked at me carefully, then spoke in a low voice. "I used to live here," he said. "I know what you're going through. I fought her too, years ago." My breath caught in my throat, because this was the first time anyone had admitted it out loud, that I wasn't the first, and I wasn't crazy. She doesn't fight fair, he continued. She doesn't need to. She owns the board. She owns the neighbors. And if you're not careful, she'll own you too. I asked him why he left, and his eyes darkened. She ruined me, he whispered. Fines, liens, threats. She drove me out of my own home, and nobody stopped her. The weight of his words crushed me, because suddenly I could see my own future playing out the same way, losing everything, not because of what I did, but because I had the courage to stand against her. But then he leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. There's one thing she's afraid of, he said. One thing she can't control, no matter how hard she tries. My heart pounded. Finally, a crack in her armor, a weakness. What is it? I asked, almost whispering. What's the thing she fears? He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, as if Karen herself might be hiding in the shadows. Then he whispered two words that changed everything. Public record. I stared at him, confused at first, until he explained. She can bend HOA rules, she can twist neighbors, she can manipulate meetings, but she can't erase government records, lawsuits, police files, anything filed in the county clerk's office. It's permanent. It's untouchable. The realization hit me like lightning. If I could dig, if I could find her past, if I could prove she had done this before, then maybe, just maybe, I could finally break her grip on this neighborhood. But the man didn't smile. Instead, he leaned closer, eyes sharp. Be careful, he said again. If you go digging, you won't just find her secrets. She'll know you're looking, and she'll come for you harder than ever before. And then he turned, walked down the street, and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing there, trembling, holding on to those two words echoing in my head. Public record. I couldn't sleep that night. Those two words kept circling in my head. Public record. The stranger's warning echoed over and over, like a whisper that wouldn't die down. If Karen had ruined others before me, if she had buried families under fines and threats, then somewhere there had to be proof by morning. I had already made my decision. I drove to the county office downtown, an old building with high ceilings and dusty files that smelled like time itself. The clerk barely looked at me when I asked for records on Karen and her property, but when he returned with the stack of papers, my hands trembled as I opened them. It was all there. Pages of complaints, lawsuits, police calls, disputes with neighbors that stretched back years. I saw names I didn't recognize, but also dates that matched whispers I had once heard at block parties. Families who moved away suddenly. People who lost their homes. Stories that never made sense until now. And every single one of them had Karen's name written somewhere in the middle of it, like a spider at the center of her web. But then I found something else. Something that made my heart race faster than ever. A police report. Not against a neighbor, not against a random homeowner, but against her son. It described reckless driving, property damage, and an accident that sounded almost identical to mine, except this time, he hadn't been able to walk away so easily. The words blurred as I read them. Charges dismissed. Evidence lost. Witnesses silenced. It was clear. Karen had covered it up. My hands shook as I copied the documents. slipping them into my folder like stolen treasure. Because I knew this was more than a pattern. This was corruption, and it stretched deeper than anyone dared to admit. As I left the building, I felt eyes on me, not the casual glance of a stranger, but sharp, lingering, heavy. I looked over my shoulder, but no one stood there. Just cars passing and shadows shifting in the morning sun. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Had she already found out? Was Karen watching even now? When I got home, I locked the door twice, drew the blinds, spread the documents out on my table like a map of war, and for the first time, I felt like I had something powerful, something she couldn't twist. But as I stared at the papers, a question gnawed at me. How far was I willing to go? Because exposing her meant exposing myself too. And if I failed, she would burn me to the ground. That night, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. No name. Just words that froze my blood. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. I dropped the phone, my chest pounding. The stranger at my door had warned me, but I hadn't expected the threat to come so soon, so direct. I didn't sleep at all. Every sound outside felt louder. Every shadow on the wall felt closer. And by morning, I was exhausted, but more determined than ever. Because if Karen was trying to scare me, it meant I was close. Closer than anyone had ever gotten before. I gathered the documents, slipped them into a binder, and decided I would take them to the next HOA meeting. This time, I would not walk in unprepared. But just as I zipped the folder shut, there was another knock at my door. Soft at first, then harder, louder, insistent. I froze. Was it the stranger again? The one who warned me? Or was it Karen herself, come to collect what I had stolen from her past? The knock came again, shaking the door this time. I stepped closer, heart hammering against my ribs, and when I finally looked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't the old man. It was her son. Standing there with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, hands stuffed into his pockets like he owned the night. When he saw the shadow of my movement behind the peephole, he leaned in closer, whispering loud enough for me to hear through the wood. "You really think you can beat my mom?" His words weren't a question. They were a threat. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting her entire family. I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in silence until his footsteps faded. But his voice stayed with me, rattling around in my skull long after he left. Because now, I knew the war had truly begun. And if I lost, it wouldn't just cost me my fence or my home. It might cost me everything. The next HOA meeting didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like a trial, and I was the defendant. I walked into the clubhouse with the binder clutched tight in my hand. Every pair of eyes followed me, whispering, judging, waiting for the show to start. Karen was already there, sitting at the head of the table like a queen on her throne. Her son leaned against the wall behind her, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face. The board sat stiffly on either side, too scared to speak, too scared to move. The moment I sat down, Karen smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before striking. "I hope you're ready," she purred, "because tonight the board is voting on sanctions against you." Sanctions. Fines. punishment. She was already writing my ending before the night had even begun. But I didn't flinch. I set the binder on the table, slowly, opened it, and spread the documents out like cards in a winning hand. "Before you vote," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I think everyone should see this." The room went quiet. The papers glared under the fluorescent lights, complaints, lawsuits, police reports, all carrying the same name, hers. Whispers broke out, neighbors leaning closer, scanning the pages with wide eyes. The board shifted uncomfortably. One member even coughed nervously as if he'd swallowed guilt itself. Karen's smile faltered, just for a second. Then she laughed, sharp and hollow. "Old records," she sneered, "irrelevant, taken out of context, and digging through private files, that alone is grounds for removal." But I was ready. I pulled out the police report, the one with her son's name on it, and before she could speak again, I read it out loud, every reckless word, every dismissed charge. Her son shifted against the wall, the smirk fading from his lips. The room was no longer whispering. It was buzzing. People who had once been silent now murmured with anger, disbelief, disgust. I looked straight at the board. "How many families has she driven out?" I asked, my voice rising. "How many neighbors have been silenced while she twisted the rules for herself? How many of you knew and stayed quiet?" No one answered, but I could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the cracks forming in the wall of her power. Karen slammed her hand on the table. Her voice rang out like a whip. "This meeting is over. He is out of order. Security." But there was no security. Only neighbors, only witnesses. And this time, they weren't looking at me like I was the enemy. They were looking at her,